The night was cold and the wind carried sand across the empty desert. A lonely human traveler walked beside his tired horse, its steps heavy and weak. It was the last horse he had, the only reason he had survived this far. Food was gone, water was low, and hope was almost finished. He whispered to the animal to stay strong, but deep in his heart, he knew it could not go on much longer. He searched the horizon for any sign of shelter, but all he saw was endless sand and sharp rocks. The stars above were bright, but they only reminded him of how far from home he was. He thought about stopping, but if he stopped, the cold would kill him. So he kept walking until something unusual caught his eye. A faint glow, soft and strange, like fire, but not fire. Cautiously, he pulled his horse toward it. His body was shaking from hunger and exhaustion, but curiosity pushed him forward. As he got closer, he saw the glow came from a dying fire. Around it lay scattered ashes and broken branches, and next to it, almost hidden in the sand, was a figure. At first he thought it was another dead traveler, but then he saw the skin. Not human skin, but glowing faintly, like silver touched by moonlight. The figure was a girl, alien and fragile. Her body was trembling and her breathing shallow. She had wounds across her arms and chest, dark blood drying in the sand beneath her. Her clothes were torn, and her face was pale with pain. She looked like she had been running for days, then collapsed. Her eyes were closed, but her lips moved as if whispering something in a language he could not understand. The man stood there, his heart pounding. He knew he should walk away. This was not his problem. He was barely alive himself, and his horse could not carry more weight. If he helped her, he would lose everything. Yet he could not turn his eyes from her. She looked so lost, so broken, like someone who had already been abandoned by the world. He knelt beside her, pressing his ear close to her mouth. Her breath was weak, almost gone. She would not survive the night without help. He touched her forehead and felt the heat of fever. She needed warmth, food, and strength, things he no longer had. The only thing he could give was the life of his horse. The thought tore at him like a knife. That horse had been his only friend. It had carried him across deserts, mountains, and storms. It had shared his hunger and thirst, and now it looked at him with tired eyes. Trusting him, he brushed its mane and whispered, "I am sorry." He knew what he must do, but his heart resisted. The alien girl stirred weakly, opening her eyes just a little. Her eyes glowed faintly, strange and beautiful. She looked at him, not with fear but confusion, as if asking why he was there. For a moment their eyes met, and he saw something familiar. Loneliness, the same loneliness he had carried for years. He realized then that she was just like him, lost and alone. The fire beside her was dying. The cold night would finish her soon. He tightened his jaw, fighting the pain inside him. Then slowly, he guided his horse forward. His hands trembled as he pulled out his knife. The horse nickered, softly as if it understood. With tears burning his eyes, he made the choice. The sacrifice was not for himself, but for her. He used the horse's warmth and blood to give life back to the girl. He wrapped her in what little he had, covering her wounds, pressing the heat against her shivering body. She gasped faintly, her chest rising and falling with new strength. He sat there, holding her steady, whispering to her, even though she did not understand. Hours passed slowly. The fire finally went out, but the girl's breathing grew stronger. The man leaned against the cold rock, his body shaking from loss and exhaustion. He had nothing left, no food, no horse, no way forward. Yet when he looked at the alien girl, still alive in the darkness, he felt something he had not felt in years. Hope. The desert was silent, the stars still watching from above. In that moment he knew his journey had changed. He was no longer walking for himself. He was walking for her, for a stranger he did not know, for a life he could not abandon. And somewhere deep in the night, a whisper of footsteps echoed across the sands, unseen eyes watching from the distance, waiting for the dawn. The night dragged on slowly, The human sat close to the alien girl, listening to the sound of her weak breaths. He was exhausted, his body shaking from hunger and the cold desert air, but he stayed awake. His horse was gone, sacrificed so that she might live, and now all he had was the weight of that choice and the fragile life he had saved. When the first light of dawn touched the desert sky, the alien girl stirred. Her eyelids fluttered and her glowing eyes opened just a little. She looked around in confusion, her lips moving softly. At first she seemed frightened, but then her gaze settled on him, sitting there beside her. She blinked, trying to understand why a human was beside her in the middle of nowhere. Her voice was faint, like wind moving through dry leaves. She whispered, something he did not understand. Her words were broken, foreign, but her tone carried both fear and wonder. The human leaned closer and said in a calm voice, "You're safe now." She tilted her head, not knowing his words, but sensing the gentleness in his tone. Slowly, she noticed the remains of his horse not far from them. Her body trembled as she realized what he had done. Her kind could sense sacrifice, and though she could not speak his language, she understood enough. Her eyes widened with disbelief. Why would a human give up something so important for her? The man lowered his eyes, his hands covered in dust and dried blood. He felt the weight of her stare. He knew she was asking with her eyes why he did it. He gave a small, tired smile and said softly, "Because you were alone. Like me." She didn't understand the words, but his expression told her the meaning. Her strength was not yet back. She tried to sit, but her body gave up, and she fell against him. He caught her gently, holding her steady. Her skin was cold, but slowly warming. She looked up at him with eyes that glowed faintly like stars hidden in clouds. A tear slipped from her eye, not of pain, but of confusion mixed with gratitude. Through the day he tended to her wounds, he used cloth torn from his own shirt to bind them. He gave her what little water he had left. Pressing the container to her lips, she drank weakly, her hands trembling as she touched his. For a moment she closed her eyes, as if she could not believe that kindness still existed. The man thought of his horse again, and grief tightened his chest. That horse had been his only companion for years. Now it was gone, its life given so that this alien girl could breathe. He wondered if he had been foolish. What if she died anyway? What if his sacrifice was for nothing? But when he saw her blinking up at him, her breath stronger than before, he felt that maybe it was worth it. The sun burned hot above them, and the desert stretched endlessly in every direction. They had no shelter, no food, and now no way to travel quickly, yet he carried her on his back when she was too weak to walk. His steps were heavy, but he pushed on. She clung to him, her head resting on his shoulder. At times she whispered names, words in her tongue he did not know, but the way she said them told him they were important. That evening, when the stars returned, they sat by a small fire he managed to light. The girl stared at the flames, her eyes shining in their glow. Then she looked at him and pointed to her chest, whispering a word softly. It was her name. He repeated it clumsily, and she gave a weak smile. For the first time since he had found her face softened. She then pointed at him, asking silently for his name. He gave it, and though she could not say it well, she tried. Her voice was broken, but sincere. As the fire burned low, she spoke again, whispering about her sisters. The words were broken, but he caught the meaning. She was not alone, not truly. She had family, sisters taken by raiders. She whispered their names like a prayer, tears slipping down her face. The human sat quietly, listening. He did not understand everything, but he understood the pain. He knew what it meant to lose family, to walk alone in a world that did not care. In the silence of the night, she reached for his hand. Her fingers were thin, trembling, but she held on tightly. He let her, not pulling away. Her glowing eyes looked into his, and though no words passed between them, an unspoken bond formed. He had saved her life, but in that moment she gave him something in return, a reason to keep going. Above them the stars seemed brighter. The desert was still endless. Danger still waited beyond the horizon. But for For the first time in years, the man did not feel completely alone. He looked at the alien girl resting by his side and whispered quietly, "You'll see them again, I promise." She didn't understand the words, but she closed her eyes and leaned closer to him, trusting him far away in the darkness. Unseen figures moved silently across the dunes, watching, waiting. The night carried their whispers, and the man and the alien girl, unaware, sat together by the fire, bound by sacrifice and a fragile hope. The fire was small and weak, the flames dancing softly in the desert night. The man sat close to it, his arms wrapped around himself, his eyes heavy with exhaustion. Beside him, the alien girl rested, her breathing steadier now. She was alive, because of him, but still fragile, like glass that could break with one wrong touch. He looked at her glowing skin, faint under the firelight, and wondered who she really was. Why had she been alone in the desert? Why had she been left to die? When she opened her eyes again, the glow in them was faint but warm. She tried to speak, her words broken and strange. He could not understand most of them, but slowly, through gestures, he began to catch pieces of her meaning. She told him of sisters, 2 or maybe 3, taken by raiders under the red sun. Her voice trembled as she spoke their names, her hand pressing against her chest with each one. He nodded, listening quietly, letting her know she was heard. As the night grew colder, he gave her his only cloak, wrapping it around her thin frame. She looked at him with wide eyes, touched by the simple act. She did not know his language, but she understood the weight of his kindness. The man leaned back against the rock, staring at the stars above. For the first time in years, he was not just thinking about his own survival. He thought of her, of the pain in her voice when she spoke of her sisters, and of how fragile her smile had been when she tried to repeat his name. The desert was quiet, too quiet, but not empty. Sometimes the man thought he saw shapes moving in the distance, shadows shifting at the edge of the dunes. He kept his knife close, his eyes sharp even when his body begged for rest. Something out there was watching them, waiting. He felt it in his bones. The girl noticed his unease. Her glowing eyes followed his gaze into the darkness. She whispered something softly, her voice low and uncertain. He could not understand, but he could feel the fear in it. He placed a hand on his chest and nodded to her, promising silently that he would protect her. She lowered her head, trusting him more than before. When dawn came, they began to walk again. The girl was too weak to travel far, so the man carried her on his back. His steps were slow, heavy with the weight of her body and the loss of his horse, but he did not complain. She clung to him, her arms around his neck. Her breath was warm against his shoulder. At times, she whispered her sisters' names again, like a prayer. He said nothing, but each name carved itself into his memory. During the day, the sun was merciless. It burned the sand and their skin. The man gave her the last drops of water, ignoring his own thirst. His lips cracked, his body trembled, but he refused to stop. When she realized what he was doing, she tried to push the water back to him, but he gently closed her hands around it and shook his head. She looked at him, her eyes filling with tears. She drank slowly, her voice breaking as she whispered something he did not understand, but her tone told him she was saying thank you. That night, when they rested again by a small fire, the girl leaned against him. She was still weak, but her eyes no longer looked at him with fear. She began to hum softly, a sound like wind through crystal. It was a song, low and broken but filled with sadness. The man listened quietly, letting the sound wash over him. It was beautiful, haunting, and it made his chest ache with emotions he had long buried. When the song ended, she looked at him and touched her chest again, repeating her sisters' names. Then she pointed to him, as if asking if he had anyone. His eyes darkened, and for a long moment he said nothing. Finally, he whispered a single name, the name of someone he had lost long ago. He did not explain, but the grief in his eyes was enough. The girl's expression softened. She understood. She knew what it meant to lose family. In that moment, An invisible thread tied them together. Both were broken. Both carried loss. But now neither was alone. The fire burned low. The desert wind whistled, and somewhere in the distance a cry echoed across the dunes. The man tensed, gripping his knife. The girl's hand clutched his arm tightly, fear in her glowing eyes. They sat close together, listening, waiting. The sound faded, leaving silence once more. But the warning was clear. They were not safe. Something was hunting them. He did not know if it was raiders, beasts, or something worse, but he knew the shadows in the desert were not just tricks of the night. The man looked at the girl, then at the horizon where the stars touched the sand. He made a silent promise he would not let her die, not after what he had already given, not after the bond they had begun to share. She leaned against him again, her breathing slow and steady. He held his knife in one hand, and her close with the other, watching the darkness. The desert was endless, their chances small, but deep inside, a spark of determination grew. For the first time in a long time, he was fighting not for himself, but for someone else. Someone who needed him, someone who made him feel human again. And so the night passed, heavy with silence and whispers, as unseen eyes in the distance watched the man and the alien girl, waiting for the right moment to strike. The desert grew colder as night stretched on. The man sat close to the fading fire, his knife resting in his hand. His eyes kept scanning the darkness, searching for movement. He had learned to trust his instincts, and his instincts told him they were not alone. The alien girl slept beside him, her breathing soft, her face calm for the first time since he found her. She clutched his torn cloak like it was a shield, unaware of the danger hiding in the dunes. A sound broke the silence, soft and distant, like footsteps on shifting sand. The man tensed, every muscle in his body ready. His eyes narrowed as he stared into the darkness, but there was nothing, only shadows stretching under the pale light of the moons. Still, he knew someone was there, watching, waiting. He pushed more sand onto the fire to dim the flames, wrapping them in deeper darkness he could not risk being seen. The girl stirred, waking with a soft groan. Her glowing eyes blinked open, and she looked at him with confusion. He put a finger to his lips, signaling her to be silent. She froze, her body trembling as she realized the danger. She whispered something in her language, a word heavy with fear. He didn't understand it, but he felt its weight. It was the kind of word spoken only when death was near. Hours passed slowly, every moment thick with tension. Sometimes the man thought he saw movement at the edge of the dunes, dark shapes slipping back whenever he looked. The fire had burned out, leaving only smoke and glowing embers. The cold bit into their skin, but he dared not relight it. They would survive the cold, but not the hunters if they gave away their position. When morning came, the world looked empty again. The sun rose hot, washing away the night's fear, but the man knew better. The danger had not gone, it was only hiding. He helped the girl to her feet, but her wounds made it hard for her to walk. Without the horse, progress was slow, and the endless desert stretched like a prison with no walls. By midday, her strength began to fail. She stumbled often, her glowing skin pale and weak. The man carried her when she could not stand, his body straining under the weight. Sweat burned his eyes, his throat dry as dust, but he kept moving. He could not stop. Stopping meant death. As the sun dropped lower, he searched for shelter. He spotted a narrow canyon between two broken ridges of stone. Its shadow promised relief from the heat. He guided her there, carefully lowering her onto the cool ground. She gasped softly, her eyes closing as exhaustion took her. The man knelt beside her, worried by how weak she was becoming. She needed more than rest, she needed healing. He searched the canyon, moving quickly. His eyes scanned the cracks between rocks, the small patches of sand. He remembered stories from traders about desert herbs, strange plants that grew even in this harsh land. After nearly an hour, he found them, tiny leaves hidden beneath thorny roots. He pulled them free, crushing them into a paste with stones. When he returned, the girl was trembling in her sleep. He placed the herb paste gently over her wounds. She winced but did not wake. Slowly, the bleeding slowed, the swelling eased. Her breathing steadied. A little he exhaled, relief washing over him. For the first time since the night he had found her, he felt a spark of hope. But hope was fragile as he tended to her. A sound echoed through the canyon, a sharp crack of stone under a boot. The man froze, his knife already in his hand. He looked toward the shadows at the canyon's mouth. His heart pounded. He could not see them, but he felt their eyes. He moved, closer to the girl, placing himself between her and the opening. His body was tense, his hand gripping the knife so tightly his knuckles turned white. Another sound followed, this time a whisper carried on the wind, a language he did not know. Harsh and low, he knew now they were being hunted. The girl stirred again, her lips moving as she whispered names in her sleep, her sister's names. The man glanced down at her, then back to the canyon's edge. He realized the hunters might not be after him. They might be after her. She was important, more than he had guessed. That was why she had been left to die, and why others now hunted them in the dark. Night came again, and with it, silence heavy with threat. The man did not sleep. His eyes stayed locked on the shadows. His knife never left his hand. The girl whispered in her dreams, her voice breaking. She called for her sisters again and again as if she could sense they were near. The desert wind howled through the canyon, carrying with it the faint sound of footsteps circling above. The man's grip tightened. He knew the battle would come soon. He had nothing left but his strength and his will. But he would not give her up. She had become more than a stranger, more than a burden. She was his purpose now. She was the reason he kept moving when everything told him to stop. And as he sat in the cold, dark canyon, with danger pressing closer, he swore silently that he would fight to his last breath before letting them take her. Far above, in the ridges, glowing eyes flickered in the night. Hunters moved silently, patient and cruel. The man did not see them, but he could feel the weight of their presence. They were waiting for dawn, and when dawn came, the desert would no longer be silent. The canyon was cold through the night, the kind of cold that ate into bones. The man sat with his back against the stone wall, his knife in his hand, his eyes refusing to close. Beside him, the alien girl shivered under his torn cloak, her breath shallow but steady. He could hear her whispering in her sleep. The same names again and again, the names of her sisters. Each time she spoke them, his chest tightened. He wondered if they were alive or only ghosts in her memory. By dawn, his body felt like it was breaking. His arms ached from carrying her. His lips cracked from thirst, and his legs felt like they were made of lead. Still, he did not rest. When the light crept across the canyon, he helped her stand. But after a few steps, she collapsed. He caught her before she hit the ground. Her weight was so light it felt like he was holding a shadow. "You have to live," he whispered, though he knew she could not understand. He looked at the endless desert stretching out beyond the canyon. He had no horse, no food, no water left. His strength was nearly gone, and still the shadows of hunters lingered at the edge of his vision. Every sound made him turn. Every movement of sand made his heart race. He set her down gently on a flat rock and pressed his hand to her forehead. Her skin was burning again with fever. He knew the herbs he had found had slowed the bleeding, but they could not heal her fully. She needed more, something he could not give. He clenched his fists in frustration, feeling helpless. The alien girl opened her eyes slowly. Her glowing gaze met his, and for a moment she just studied him. Then, with trembling fingers, she touched his hand. Her lips moved, forcing out broken words in her language. He did not understand them all, but he caught one, the word for promise. She was asking him for one thing, that he would not leave her. His throat tightened. He squeezed her hand gently, nodding. "I won't," he said. His voice was firm even though his body was failing. She closed her eyes again, comforted by his answer, though she could not fully understand it. The day dragged, on with cruel heat. The man carried her when he could, but every step drained him. His vision blurred from thirst, and his knees threatened to give way. At one point he fell to the sand, the weight of her body pulling him down. For a long moment he did not move. He thought perhaps this was the end, that he would die here in the dust. But then he heard her weak voice, whispering his name. The sound was broken, fragile, but it pulled him back. He forced himself to stand. Again, to lift her once more, he stumbled forward, step after step, his breath ragged, his own body breaking, but his will unshaken. As the sun lowered, he finally reached a small outcrop of stone, enough to shield them from the wind. He laid her down carefully. His own body collapsed beside hers. His vision swam with black spots. He was starving, dehydrated, his muscles screaming. He thought about closing his eyes, but he knew if he slept too deeply he might never wake. The alien girl stirred. Her hand reached for his. Weak but desperate, she whispered again, this time a word he did not know. It sounded like a plea. He brushed her hair back gently and whispered, "I'll keep you safe." His voice cracked, but his eyes held steady. He had nothing left to give her but his promise. Night came again, and with it the sound of movement. This time it was clearer, closer, the soft scrape of claws or boots against stone. The man's body jolted with fear and anger. He pushed himself, up knife in hand, though his strength was fading. He stood protectively over her, his chest rising and falling with heavy breaths. The shadows moved beyond the rocks. He could not see them clearly, but he knew they were circling. His grip tightened on the blade. He was ready to fight, even if it killed him. Behind him, the girl whispered again in her sleep, the names of her sisters, louder now, almost like she could feel them near. His body swayed, weakness pulling him down. He dropped to one knee, his breath ragged. He whispered to himself, "Maybe I won't live to see you safe." He looked at her peaceful face and felt pain twist inside him. "But you will live, I swear it." At that moment, the first light of dawn broke across the desert. A sharp cry echoed from the dunes, loud and fierce. The man spun around, his knife ready, though his hands shook. From the rising sun came dark shapes, tall figures moving fast. Their armor caught the light. Their eyes glowed bright. They were not hunters. They were warriors. The alien girl opened her eyes weakly, and when she saw them, her lips parted. Her trembling hand reached toward them, whispering one word with tears in her eyes, "Sisters." The man's chest tightened as the warriors surrounded them, their weapons drawn, their expressions hard. They looked at him with fire in their eyes. He stood between them and the girl, his knife shaking in his grip. He knew what was coming. He had saved her, carried her, given her everything. But to them, he was just a human standing over their wounded kin. The sisters' eyes blazed with fury. One raised her blade, and for a heartbeat the desert went silent. The man clenched his teeth, his body swaying, but his spirit unbroken. If this was his end, he would face it standing. The alien girl cried out, her weak voice breaking the silence. Her hand gripped his arm as she tried to sit up, her glowing eyes locked on her sisters. Pleading, she whispered their names again, louder this time, desperate. The warriors froze, their blades still raised. Suspense filled the air as the man and the alien girl waited for their judgment. The desert was quiet, yet the silence felt heavy. The man stood weak and tired, his knife shaking in his hand. Around him stood the alien warriors, the sisters of the girl he had saved. Their armor shimmered under the morning light, their glowing eyes filled with fury. They had found their kin alive, but what they saw was a human standing over her body, and to them, it looked like he had claimed her as his prize. The tallest of the sisters stepped forward, her blade raised, her voice rang out in their strange tongue, sharp and filled with anger. Though the man could not understand her words, he knew what they meant. They believed he had harmed the girl. They thought he had taken advantage of her weakness. His chest tightened. He wanted to shout that he had given everything to protect her, that he had sacrificed his last horse and nearly his life, but words were useless when they could not understand. The alien girl pushed herself up, weak and trembling. She cried out, her voice desperate, She spoke quickly in her language, pointing at the man. Her glowing eyes filled with tears. She tried to tell them what he had done, how he had saved her. But her sisters did not lower their weapons. They did not trust humans. They had seen too many lies, too many betrayals. The man lowered his knife, his body swaying from exhaustion. He did not want to fight them. He had no strength left. And even if he did, he would never raise his hand against her family. Instead, he spread his arms slowly, showing he meant no harm. His chest rose and fell with heavy breaths. He whispered softly, "I only wanted her to live." But the sisters did not hear the meaning. Their fury was stronger than their reason. One stepped forward and slashed her blade through the air. The man barely raised his knife in time to block. The force knocked him backward, pain shooting through his arm. He stumbled, his vision blurring. The girl screamed, trying to crawl toward him, but her body was too weak. Another sister moved in, her weapon aimed for his chest. He rolled aside, his body scraping against the rough sand and stone. His knife was small compared to their massive blades. His strength was nearly gone, yet his eyes burned with determination. If they killed him, so be it, but he would not back down. The sisters circled him, their glowing eyes flashing with rage. The girl kept shouting, her voice cracking. She repeated the same words again and again, pointing toward the remains of his horse. She tried to show them the truth, that he had given up everything for her. Still, the warriors hesitated. Their anger was strong, but doubt crept into their eyes. The tallest sister shouted something, harsh, and two of them grabbed the girl gently but firmly, trying to pull her away from him. She fought against them, her hands clawing at the sand, her voice breaking as she cried out. Her glowing eyes locked on the man, begging her sisters to listen. The man forced himself to stand tall, blood dripping from a cut on his arm. His knife trembled, but his spirit did not, he whispered under his breath. "You don't understand, I saved her." His chest burned with frustration. He wanted them to see, to know the truth. But no matter what he said, his words were empty to their ears. Then one of the sisters looked toward the remains of the horse, her eyes narrowed as she studied it. The girl shouted again, pointing at the same place. Finally, the sister's expression shifted. The truth began to show itself. She realized the man had killed his only companion not for survival, but to keep their sister alive. Her blade lowered slightly, but the others did not follow. They still stood ready to strike. Their distrust was deep. The girl screamed in pain, her voice hoarse. She collapsed to her knees, clutching her chest. The sisters froze in shock, rushing to her side. Their anger broke as worry took over. They gathered around her, holding her trembling body. In that moment, the man dropped to his knees too, his strength finally gone. He let the knife fall to the sand. His body sagged, his vision spinning. He whispered softly, "Please, just save her." His voice cracked, heavy with despair. The sisters looked at him, and for the first time their anger began to fade. They saw his wounds, his broken body, the emptiness in his eyes. He was not an enemy. He was a man who had given everything. They lowered their blades one by one, silence falling over the canyon. The tallest sister knelt beside the alien girl, touching her face gently. She spoke in a low voice, comforting her. Then she turned her eyes back to the man. Her gaze was sharp, testing. She asked something in her language, the tone carrying suspicion mixed with curiosity. The man did not understand, but he lifted his head and met her gaze. His voice was quiet but steady as he said, "Because life is worth saving." She could not understand the words, but she felt the truth in his eyes. She studied him for a long moment before standing. Her blade was lowered, but not fully put away. The other sisters followed, their distrust still present but no longer burning with rage. The alien girl, weak and pale, reached for the man's hand. Her fingers wrapped around his as she whispered. Her voice was small, but the word was clear. Safe. She looked at her sisters, then at him. Her message was simple. He had kept her safe when no one else did. The sisters stood in silence, the desert wind carrying sand around them. The man knelt, in the dust, broken but unyielding, The girl clung to him, her sisters torn between anger and reluctant respect. The dawn had come, but their judgment was not yet complete. He had survived their blades, but now he had to survive their decision. Would they accept him as an ally? Or would they cast him aside as just another human who did not belong in their world? The sun rose slowly over the desert, painting the sky in red and gold. The light spread across the dunes, touching the faces of the alien sisters and the human man kneeling in the sand. The air was heavy with silence, broken only by the sound of the weak alien girl breathing as she clung to his arm. Her sisters stood in a half circle, their blades lowered but not forgotten. Their glowing eyes shifted between him and her, trying to understand what had truly happened during the long nights he had carried her. The man could barely keep himself. Upright, his body shook from exhaustion. His lips cracked from thirst, his knife lay forgotten on the sand. He had nothing left but his will. Still, he lifted his head and met the eyes of the tallest sister. She stared at him like she could see through him, searching for lies. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then she spoke in her language, the words sharp and commanding. He could not understand, but the weight of her tone was clear. She was demanding an answer. The alien girl weakly raised her hand, trying to speak for him. Her voice cracked as she told them about the night he found her, about the fire that had almost died, about the horse he had sacrificed. Her sisters listened, their expressions cold but shaken. They looked at the remains in the sand, at the man's torn hands and wounds. Slowly the truth began to settle in their minds. One of the younger sisters whispered something, her eyes softening as she studied. Another hissed in reply, still doubtful. Still, the tallest sister stepped closer, her shadow falling over him. She pointed at him with her blade and asked again. Her eyes burned with demand. Why? The man's voice was rough, but he forced the words out. Because life matters, he whispered. His chest rose and fell with each broken breath. Any life, even if it's not my own kind. He knew they did not understand the words, but he spoke them anyway. His voice carried not meaning, but truth. The alien girl translated in broken whispers, her hands clutching her sister's arm. Her voice was weak, but every word was filled with desperation. She told them he had no reason to save her, that he could have left her to die, but he chose to give everything. She whispered, "He saved me because I was alone." Her glowing eyes filled with tears as she looked at him. Like him, the tallest sister lowered her blade slowly. Her jaw tightened as she considered the human. Her gaze moved to the girl who leaned against him, clutching his arm as if letting go meant death. Finally, the sister gave a sharp command, and the other warriors lowered their weapons. The air shifted, the tension breaking. The man's body sagged with relief, but he did not smile. He was too tired, too broken. He simply sat back against the rock and closed his eyes for a moment. The alien girl leaned into him, her face calm for the first time since he had found her. Her sisters gathered close, kneeling, beside her, touching her gently. Their eyes were still cautious, but the anger was gone. The youngest of the sisters looked at the man with curiosity. She tilted her head and spoke softly in their language, asking something he did not understand. The girl beside him translated in a faint voice. She asks, "Why you care? Why you risked everything for me?" The man opened his eyes slowly. He looked at the sisters, then at the girl leaning on him. His throat tightened, but he answered simply, "Because no one deserves to die alone." His words were quiet, but they carried the weight of his heart. The girl whispered his answer in her own tongue, and the sisters fell silent. Their eyes softened, not with full trust, but with understanding. The desert wind blew across them, lifting strands of hair and scattering sand. The sisters helped their injured kin to her feet, but she refused to let go of the human's hand. She held it tightly, her glowing eyes looking at her sisters with defiance. She whispered, "He is not enemy." The words were broken but strong enough. The tallest sister studied the human one last time. Her gaze was heavy, but not hostile anymore. At last she gave a single nod, slow and reluctant. It was not a welcome. Not yet. But it was acceptance. She would not strike him down. She would let him live. The man felt a strange ache in his chest, He had expected to die here either by their blades or the desert itself. Instead, he was still alive, not because of his strength, but because the girl he had saved now stood between him and death. He realized then that his journey was no longer his own. It belonged to her, to them, to the bond that had been forged in blood and sacrifice. The group began to move, leaving the canyon behind. The sisters supported their injured kin, and the man walked beside them, his steps unsteady but determined. The sun rose higher, casting long shadows across the desert. For the first time, he did not feel like a wanderer lost in endless sand. He was part of something larger, part of a story that had only just begun. The alien girl glanced at him as they walked. Her voice was soft, almost a whisper, "You, not alone now." The words were broken but clear enough to reach him. His chest tightened, and for the first time in years, he allowed himself a small, tired smile. Behind them, the desert stretched on, endless and unforgiving. Ahead of them lay uncertainty, perhaps danger, perhaps hope. But for now they walked together, no longer strangers, no longer alone. And as the morning sun painted the sky bright, the man felt the weight of his sacrifice ease. The horse he had lost, the blood, the exhaustion. It had all led to this moment, to her survival, to the bond that had brought him back from the edge of despair. He whispered quietly, almost to himself, "I am not alone anymore." The girl squeezed his hand, her glowing eyes filled with warmth. Her sisters marched ahead, their heads high, and together they disappeared into the rising light of dawn, leaving behind the silence of the desert and the shadows that once hunted them.